Good morning everyone. I am Anindya Bhattacharya from School of Management Sciences Varanasi, and today we have the privilege to have Professor Gramwad from INSEAD in our conference. Professor Gramwad is a coaching practice director at INSEAD Business School in France, and is also a director of Kids Device Institute. Professor Wad also has a corporate background. He has worked for more than 16 years with Goldman Sachs, one of the leading investment bankers, co-leading the European business. So thank you very much, Professor Gram, for being here. First, tell me a bit about the kind of work that you do with your consulting clients.
So we're in the development business, and what does that really mean? It means we're interested in getting people to develop their self-awareness. We're interested in people learning to reflect on themselves, to take an inner journey, and to understand not only who they are, but what they would like to become. And that is, in essence, what we do. And we have a modus operandi to help them get there.
All right. Tell me something. What brought you to this particular conference?
Well, you sent me an invitation, is the first thing, and so how could I resist? But you know, seriously, what struck me is that in the West, I feel that management has lost its way, and no matter how many different techniques or models we roll out, if you look at the business world today, and if you look at the headlines almost daily, we realize that, you know, some leaders have become morally bankrupt, and our political leaders have let us down. And when I saw this conference advertised, I just felt maybe there's something here. Maybe there's something that we need to transfer to the West, because our models are not working.
Right. So that brings me down to the question, in the last 10 years, since you come from an investment banking background, for the last 10 years the amount of research in empirical finance has gone up tremendously, and today they are hired and paid a lot in the Wall Street. So, but then we also saw one in your presentation what the Lehman Brothers directors spoke, the way he spoke, many inhuman things he spoke about, right? So tell me something more about it. How do you address this disconnection, and how do you make this transition that people don't just think empirically, but they also start thinking in a new ways?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say that, I mean, in the year 2013, I think the world is changing. I do think that the banking world will change, and I have a sufficient amount of evidence from some of the senior leaders at the top of some pretty big banks at the moment that they will not allow this to happen again. The question is, why did we allow this to happen in the first place, and why did we repeat what was repeated at least 3 times during the 20th century? And it has to come from 2 places, in my opinion. It has to come from the top. We have to have leaders who have integrity, who are morally facing true north, and who are self-aware, and by being self-aware can lead effectively and with wisdom, which is the theme of this conference. However, we cannot rely on leaders alone, and it requires the people that are being hired, and if we're talking about banking, the people that are being hired into banking, the people that are being hired anywhere, into any industry, also to have an eye on themselves, to be self-aware, to be reflective, to be interested in developing others, not just being in business for their own selfish means. And if you're relying on a leader to lead you to that promised land, then you can forget it. It's important that people, even at entry level, have their eye on this. Otherwise, the world will never change.
Can you just tell me one thing? That is, we teach courses in leadership, right? But then you also say that leadership has to be learned through experience, right? So what is your take on this particular view?
Well, there's 2 things. One of them is that, you know, you will acquire a certain amount of skills. To be a leader means by implication that you have followers. And so if you have followers, people are going to have to want to follow you. Why are they following you? Well, partly because you have technical capability, you probably have some personal charm, and you're probably fairly smart. And if you can do all of those things and you're courageous and honest, people will follow you up to a point. However, at some point your skills run out, and then what's left to you is the human realm. And at that point, all of those latter things that I mentioned, your ability to be authentic, to be courageous, to speak truth when required, to have integrity, to be aware of your emotions and to translate those emotions effectively to the people around you, all of that stuff has far more leverage when you're moving into the higher echelons of an organization than it is at grassroots level. And that, for me, is the swing factor, which is why we spend very little time in the business school that I work in working on technical capability and a lot more time focusing on the self.
Right. When you talk about know thyself, right? When you talk about know thyself and you say to a corporate executive that you should know yourself, what is your general reaction?
Why is the general reaction? How is this going to help me? How will this help me to make more money? How will this help me to deliver value to my shareholders? It's a very cynical reaction. It's a very defensive reaction that you would normally get because it doesn't have anything it doesn't have any numbers attached to it. There are no metrics for knowing yourself, and so it doesn't really play very well. And hence, the process that we use takes a while. You cannot say, well, let's spend half an hour for you getting to know yourself, and then when you've done that, you can tick that box and you're going to be a much more effective leader. Knowing yourself, as you know, I'm sure, is a lifelong journey. And unfortunately, a lot of these leaders haven't taken the first step on the road.
So how do you cope up with this challenge? Like, for example, you have something to say, you have something to share with them, and they are already ready with the resistances, and they are already ready with their questions that what about the shareholder expectations, what about the profits, what about the cost, so on and so forth. So how do you handle these, and how do you balance these two things?
Well, unfortunately, with great skill, which takes quite a long time, because each leader, each individual has their own very sophisticated defense mechanisms which require careful dismantling. And so in order to get to the heart of the matter, you have to treat each individual as a sort of, if you like, an individual unit of analysis. But we do this work in groups, and the reason we do it in groups is because, you know, to go back to what I was just saying, if I wanted to sort of dismantle your defenses, we would just end up having an argument. We would just argue back and forward, and you tell me why not, and I tell you why, and it would just be like watching a tennis match. What tends to happen is when you do this work in groups, the group can see ways to help you dismantle the defenses. They sniff this, if you like, this vulnerability and why the person may need to make the changes that they need to make. And through a process of gentle coercion and also support, we help the leader to recalibrate. We're not talking about a revolution, but we help them to recalibrate the way that they think about themselves and what they may want to do.
So if I